Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our latest episode of Unpacking Endpoint Management. I am Rochelle Blanchard. I'm a product manager here at Microsoft, and I focus on our communities. So I do a lot with our management advisor community and our overall security community. Danny?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Danny Guillory, Principal Product Manager on Intune. David?
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm David Geyer, product manager in Intune, and lately I've been working on the app inventory for Windows and trying to drive the next wave of improvement there. Before that, I did a lot of Windows Update stuff, but that's been a little while ago, so I'm starting to lose my knowledge there.
You'll never lose your knowledge. I'm Nicole. I'm a product manager on Intune working on Windows App Management and EAM.
All right. Cool.
We've got a good group today.
We do, definitely do. One of our favorite topics that's near and dear to me, so near and dear to all of us. Nicole, I'm going to let you kick it off. You want to talk about some new stuff that you did?
Yeah, very exciting new feature that we just released, auto updates in EAM. It was actually just released yesterday, so go check it out. We basically added a new ability in EAM for you to choose if you want to manually update or auto update your app. So if you choose auto update, then we take care of everything for you, and it auto updates when the newest updates are released. And right now, it works for required apps, but we will be expanding to available apps very soon.
All right, awesome. David, tell us a little bit about the inventory stuff. That's pretty exciting to see. I know I've used it and literally demoed it within a couple of hours at an event I did in Houston a couple of weeks ago. So oddly enough, I was super surprised. I'm like, oh God, fingers crossed, hope this works in 2 hours. Boom, I got to present and it was up. So tell us more. Tell me more about how in the heck I made that work. Or you made it.
Well, I mean, we're trying to address some of the top issues and concerns with discovered apps. And, it's been a very old system and definitely needed some updates. And so we've essentially built it on the new device inventory platform as well, which gave us a lot of benefits, not the least of which is just going faster, being able to get those updates faster. So we're actually able to collect and update inventory with diff updates multiple times a day, depending on the activity of the device, and make that turnaround a lot faster. And we're continuing to look at ways to make it even faster. Along with that, we've done some other big improvements over the discovered apps reporting. We've got a lot more attributes like the uninstall command, the last refresh date, so you know how current that information is when you're looking at it. Architectures, languages, some of the basic attributes about the different ways that apps are installed, install location, all those things that you'll be able to take advantage of. Another key improvement that we were looking at was one of the problems with discovered apps was that it only used kind of a logged in user. And so if you had a multi-user device, the next user would come in and it would make it look like all the other users' user installed apps were removed. And then it would show the new ones. And depending on how long that took before the other user came back or a third user came on. And so user installed apps were just kind of a mess with discovered apps. So we now are inventorying all of that at once and lining up who the user is along with whether or not it's user or machine installed. So that's added, I think, some more accuracy and usefulness to the data. So those are some of the big three improvements that we've made. So far, we've added that experience to the devices tab. And so you'll see the all apps tab when you select a device. And up there, you'll have managed apps on one side and app inventory on another. And that kind of signals that we plan to kind of remove the discovered apps and managed apps tabs at some point, that you have one apps place to go to see all that context. And that's what we've delivered so far. You can just imagine as we're trying to replace discovered apps with the better experience, just some of what's coming next, like a view of all the apps in your tenant, which isn't there yet, but it is something we're actively working on. And a number of other enhancements that we're going to be able to do with the expanded data and capabilities.
Thanks, David. I want to let everyone know, if you're not seeing the screen, you might be listening only, but the link for what David is talking about is available at aka.ms/Intune app inventory docs. I do also want to remind everyone that this podcast is interactive. We're actually here and we want to answer. So make sure that you visit aka.ms/joinuem and post your questions and comments. We do have a question that has come up, so I'll start with that. How do we keep application packaging from becoming a full-time job?
Yeah, I think that question is for me and goes directly into EAM. So EAM is our enterprise-ready curated catalog of apps. We're kind of taking this as a step-by-step approach to make packaging easier and make app management not a full-time job. So we released EAM, when was it, Danny? Maybe a year or two ago. And since then, we've just been making improvements to it. So the whole purpose of EAM is to have prepackaged apps. So that already reduces some of the manual packaging, but you can still have the customization you need in a simple way with things like script installer, where you can use a script to define how you want to install the app instead of using just limited to the command line prompt. But above that, as we all know, that app management doesn't stop at the packaging step. With updates, we've released a few features, one that I just mentioned, auto updates, but there's kind of three levels to how manual your updates can be. So the first one is supersedence, where you define, which app supersedes which previous version or which other app. And then we made that a little bit easier with guided upgrade supersedence, where we can resurface the updates and all you have to do is click supersede that app. And then auto update was kind of our third step to making things even more automated, where you can just define auto update for a certain app and we take care of that. I think that's kind of the things that we've been focused on. But one other thing is we're looking into expanding the catalog even more, and that should help with making the apps that you need available so that you don't have to go and package those. But with customization, of course, you'll always still have that option.
Yeah, if I can build on that a little bit.
Go ahead, David.
One of my previous lives, I was actually in charge of the setup for Visual Studio. So a pretty big app. And some of the lessons learned there, I think, can apply in this sense. One of the things we're trying to do with the EAM catalog is give as many of the commonly used third-party apps so that you don't have to package, you don't have to manage. You just select it, target it, and go. And that's going to be your easiest path forward. But not all the apps that you're using are going to fit that model. And I think one of the biggest sources of challenges are going to be the line of business apps. And if your own internal developers are building apps and not spending a lot of time in building a really good quality setup, then it creates more work for the admin to do more packaging, detection logic, and things like that. So if you can help push requirements upstream to your own developers, or even if you've got a third party that you work with that's building apps for you, and drive the requirements to help them know how to build a well-behaved app installer and an app that does upgrades in place, those sorts of things will make the packaging so much easier and the system more reliable. And so when you're dealing with those kind of apps that aren't going to be able to be in the EAM catalog or be prepackaged for you, that's another angle to think about, is how you can get the apps to be well behaved so that you don't have to worry about supersedence so much. You don't have to worry about complex detection logic that can fail. So there's some other ways to think about improvements when you can't use something like EAM that makes it just right out of the box, click and go.
Thanks, David. We have kind of a related question. When should I use enterprise app management versus packaging my own Win32 apps?
Yeah, I think David basically answered that question, that if the rule of thumb is kind of use EAM whenever possible. If an app is available in EAM, I would start there. If not, then request it. And then if not that, then and you need customized configurations or scripts like that, Win32 apps. It's the way to go.
EAM should be your first choice. Like if you, like I've lived the packaging life way too much. I've got scars, so you should. Like I know the pain it takes. Like yeah, if you need an app, you should use EAM first. If it's not there, then like Nicole said, request it so that we can have some visibility to it and get it in there, provided we can. And then next use Win32. Like logical process step, from easiest, more hardest method, right? And the easiest thing to do is just see if the app's in EAM. If it's not, let us know. Then go package the app with Win32. And that, provided you use all of the tooling, that process can be easier also.
Okay, we have another question from tech community. Are pre and post install scripts coming to EAM apps?
It's a great question. Danny also has some history with this, maybe a few scars. But, pre-post scripts, we released a feature called Script Installer, which I kind of mentioned before, and it's available for both Win32 and EAM apps, where instead of using the command line prompt, you can say use Script Installer or use a script instead, which is PowerShell script. And then the script will take care of the entire install. So it should take care of like the pre-actions and the post-actions, as well as how the installer behaves. We don't currently have any plans to have pre and post, but happy to take any feedback. I don't know if we can throw up a feedback link on what is missing, aka.ms/Intune feedback, I see it now, of what's missing from Script Installer that would be nice to see for pre and post install scripts.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay, next question. How should we approach app protection versus device management for BYOD mobile devices?
I don't quite understand the question, to be fair. We can try to explore a little bit there. Danny, you sounded like...
Well, the question looks like it's app protection policies and mobile devices. I really don't have a solid answer there. We can elaborate a little bit, but I think that one probably needs to go to the app protection team. But I know the app protection is a while back when I was doing the app protection stuff. Each app had policies that you could deploy and protect the data that the app was accessing. How does that work related to BYOD devices? BYOD devices are not really bring your own device.
Well, isn't MAM kind of our frontline solution for that?
MAM would be the go-to, but the BYOD thing is a little tricky because the BYOD thing, you have some control, but not all control because the device is not fully enrolled. So, I mean, I think it's a good conversation and we could bring in the app protection people. So let's take that question as a follow-up and we can connect with one of the app protection people. So whoever asked that question, I would say reach out to one of us on tech community and let's get you connected with the app protection team. But really good question.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, next question. How do I standardize app deployments across multiple tenants?
Danny, do you want to take this question with your app expertise?
I don't. Well, I mean, I probably have more questions back. Is this Windows? Is this Mac? Is this other platforms? But when I think about across multiple tenants, this makes me think that this customer is probably a MSP, and they may or may not be using Lighthouse, which I know literally nothing about. So I said the word. I have no clue how it works, but I do know I've worked with MSPs, and they mentioned Lighthouse quite a bunch. Related to just, I can't really tell you how to do it across multiple tenants, like log in, log out, script, some type of AI. I don't have a solid answer for that one. You can make things easier per tenant, and that probably could be scalable to multiple tenants. But if you are, I'm assuming you're an MSP to ask that question, I don't have a solid answer for you. You probably have to go talk to whoever's on Lighthouse that can give you that info. But like, let's take follow up, or Dave or Nicole, y'all can elaborate too.
Well, and I think you'd mirror this as well, Danny, that simplifying will definitely help, right? And so we're going to come back to EAM for this one. And so if you're deploying EAM apps and you have an awful lot less to configure and a lot less to edit and modify other than targeting, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to apply that across multiple tenants, whether you do it with scripting and Graph API or you do it through consoles. And so that would be a good place to start. The simpler the app can be to configure, package, and deploy, the simpler it's going to be to replicate across tenants.
Yeah, the scripting thing is where I was defaulting to when I was thinking about it as I was responding to this question. Like, and then I default to some of our leadership, right? If it's a script, if you got to write a script, it's probably not the best experience. But yeah, I'm going to use both. We got AI now, so you're probably not even writing the script anymore. You can tell Copilot to write the script. The script should be solid enough to get you started, make your tweaks based off whatever your requirements are. But yeah, it could be an easier experience. But yeah, going off script a little bit, yeah, for other, if you need to deploy an app in multiple tenants, I just script it. Graph API, look for it in EAM. If it's not in EAM, circle back to the easiest method to the hardest I was talking about, EAM, then probably look at Windows Store, then Winget, then Win32. You can find a way to simplify it across multiple tenants. It might just take you a little bit of thinking and figuring out if the process you found out is good enough.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Okay. Next question. Why might app deployments work perfectly in testing but fail at scale? What are some common issues that we can take steps to prevent? Don't everyone jump at once.
David, go for it.
I'll jump in, and then I'm going to try to set Nicole up to build on this because I know she's got some stuff she's worked on. Again, another previous life, I was working on how to improve Windows update deployments to pretty much all computers. And I'm going to use the same theme, simple. Like the simpler apps are going to deploy a lot easier. The less work they have to do, the less complexity they have in their deployment, even within the MSI, if it's an MSI base, for an example. The ones that use a lot of custom actions and install a lot of components outside of like the general installer or an Xcopy style of install of an app have more reasons to fail, have more complexities. So simpler apps make an awful lot of impact in the deployment quality and results. The other things to look at are just device health, general device health, disk space. Device activity is one of the number one reasons why a device won't update. It's just not turned on. It's really hard to update those devices that are turned off. And then what you can do, especially if you've got Explorer available to you, is that you can do queries on what the top error codes and what the top issues are for a given app or even across multiple apps. And you can use that as guidance, and even then use AI or web searches and stuff to say, hey, how do I pre-prepare devices so they don't have these kind of problems, or how can I pre-identify those issues and create remediation scripts that I can deploy for those, so that you can then be a little bit more proactive or even reactive as necessary with solving those problems on devices. Because unfortunately, it's a very long tail. Normally, you'll get 3 or 4 things that you can set up, and that should get you 50 to 70% better in terms of the failure group. But then after that, it's a longer tail usually. So I think some of the things, Nicole, you worked on also will help with getting that app installed right the first time.
Yeah, I think we keep coming back to the same theme of simplified apps. And the less customization you have, the more likely it will work for all environments. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing in my mind. Is the environmental differences and between all the devices that you have to install to. So being, like David said, being proactive with that and testing remediation scripts, not just the installer. And I think that should cover it. but keeping things standardized in general is good practice.
Yep. Okay, we have a question from LinkedIn. When it comes to app vulnerability issues, what's the fastest way to remove vulnerable software from thousands of devices?
So this is a great question, and we just recently made the vulnerability agent in Intune into a public preview. And that's going to help in terms of bringing in the vulnerabilities into the Intune console so you can see what the top impacts, if you will, of deploying updates to devices. And vulnerability agent is enabling a certain amount of automation around deploying app updates. And we're trying to find the right update in your environment or in Winget or EAM, and offering those as options that you can use to make those deployments. Now, I mentioned update, and the question was really about uninstall. And so when update isn't the right answer for your organization, then I'm going to pivot to app inventory. And so app inventory is one of the key things that we wanted to get with the uninstall command line. That way you can identify what that uninstall command line is for the app, and you can use that in, again, with AI, build a script, use a proactive remediation script, and deploy that uninstall command to those devices. And that will probably be your fastest way to do that. Obviously, I've just talked about like, hey, this is kind of automated over here, and it's kind of like a little bit more manual steps over here. And so, yes, we are obviously starting to think about how can we make uninstall a little bit more integrated. And, the idea would be a one-click action or a two-click action kind of a thing. So hopefully we'll be able to pull some things together to make it a bit easier in the console. But today, with just so many more vulnerabilities becoming more aware, actually the pace of vulnerabilities is increasing. It's something that we're seeing in the data here at Microsoft. I think that using the uninstall command when you decide that the right action in your organization is to get rid of it. The other thing I'll add on that's something I'm looking at also is it's probably a good idea to get a copy of the installer and start to build like app control policies to block the installer as well as the app, and deploy those as well. That's kind of a second layer. So uninstallation is part of the solution, but preventing that from being reinstalled by a user later who's either stubborn or isn't aware because it's new to them that they want to try this app and they didn't know it's blocked. That's another layer, to use app control policies in order to then keep that app from getting redeployed in the organization.
So David, you mentioned about getting the uninstaller. So the first question in my head came up was, whenever you get that inventory, are we getting the uninstall string from all those apps? And then what if the uninstall string is empty when I look at the inventory of the data? Like what's the issues there? Because I'm sure you've seen them before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we start off, one of the principles that I've had with the app inventory is that in the cloud, we reflect accurately what we got from the APIs on the device. And so if you were to go to the device and search, like look at the uninstall reg key, or to run Winget from the command line, or any of the other store kind of APIs, you're going to get the same information on the device that we have in the cloud and vice versa. So that makes it a little bit more trustworthy. It makes it a little bit more understandable. So there's very little modification we're doing or construction. So if it's blank, it's because the installer didn't write that field in, or it wasn't available to us. Now, some of those are going to be a couple of different solutions. When we do have an MSI product code that we're able to get from some other source, that is in one of the available fields, particularly if it's an uninstall reg key based application. And so we will show the uninstall or the MSI product code in one of the other fields that's available. We will also show the package identifier. So I think there's a column, if I remember, we call it package name. That's where the MSI product code will be. Or if it's a store app, the app identifier will be there as well. And so you can use that to construct a uninstall command line for a store app and put that in a script as well. So there's hopefully the data is there in most cases. If it's just not a very well-written app installer that doesn't drop the information, then I'm not making stuff up for you. And you may have to do a little bit more research. But if it's there on the device, we should have the useful information. You just may have to follow a little bit of a flow chart to figure out if this, then this. If not, try this field and build up an API that way.
So does that also mean that there needs to be a minimum version of Windows? Like, are there some APIs or something that you mentioned that the APIs may not be available? So that just made me wonder if there's a minimum version.
No, all the supported versions of Windows we support today, as well as some that are out of support by the Windows team, but are still being managed by Intune. We didn't pick out any new APIs that are only available on newer versions of Windows. We're using the Package Manager API for Store Apps, so that's public. You're welcome to look it up and find out more about what we can do and can't do with that API. And then we literally look at the uninstall reg key for add or remove program installed apps, and put those together into one big list.
Awesome. All right, cool. Sorry, I was nerding out for a minute there.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, that leads to some really interesting stuff that you'll see in inventory. You'll see some apps listed twice because you can install from the store, and there's some things in the OS like Edge that put in a store entry as well as an add or remove programs entry, and so they'll both show up there in the list. VS Code could be installed via an MSI. It can also be installed via Winget, and so depending on how it's installed, it may show up a little bit differently. And a different app name for that. And so that's some of the consequences, if you will, with us trying to be as direct as possible.
Yep.
We are working on two, I'll say, post-processed fields that I think will add some value. One is we're going to call it the normalized app name. And so, if you look at add or remove programs, there's a lot of apps that will have things in the app name and an uninstall reg key that include things like architecture and version and locale, things that take away from that app name, if you will. And so we're going to strip a bunch of those things out as best as we can and provide an added field for the localized app name or the unlocalized, the normalized app name. And that will help us to kind of group the same app together across multiple versions, architectures, languages as well. So we can start to provide a more compact list of apps that is a little bit more navigable. And the other thing that we're going to do is it turns out that there isn't a single API call that will tell us if the app is a pre-installed app in Windows. So we're going to do our best to identify those with some algorithms and a little bit of hard coding. But we're going to have that available as a field and have that hide those apps by default, so that when you first come into a view of apps on a device or in the organization, that all the things like Notepad and Calculator that are always there are not shown by default. So that's hopefully coming in a few sprints. And that will help to make the app inventory experience just a little bit more focused. We chose to keep those apps inventoried because there may be a situation where there's a vulnerability that you're looking for, or just want to understand what version are on a device or what the version distribution is of Calculator or Notepad or something along those lines. And so we didn't want to hide that data and leave it on the device. So it is still coming up in the cloud, but we will filter those out by default so that you can focus on the more interesting apps that have been installed on top of the base image.
Cool.
You might have answered a little bit of this, but one of the other questions that came in was, how does EAM handle language packs and architecture-specific installers?
Yeah, I think short answer is that EAM takes care of it for you. So if there are separate installers for different architectures, we give that as options. So you don't have to package those separately yourselves.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicole. Okay, we have a question from LinkedIn. Any new monitoring tools or insights for app failures as a feature in Intune in the future pipeline?
So I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that Explorer is giving a little bit of some neat queries and some views that we don't have in app reporting today. For example, show me the top 10 failures for this app or this app type kind of queries. So that can help provide insights as to where to focus remediation efforts and which devices to even target if you're not going to target globally. In terms of further enhancements, I think that's an area I'd love to hear more about. What's needed, what would be valuable. I think our error codes might be a little bit thin today. So yeah, one thing that I've wondered about is could we expand and get a little richer information about failures? I'd love to understand a little bit more about what's needed and what's not working, or some examples of, hey, it would be great if you could do this for us to help us with app failures. And Nicole, I know you have to deal with this a lot. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it.
David's on fire today.
David is on fire, always.
Okay, we have another question from LinkedIn. I more often than not use proactive remediation scripting to create evergreen installers for software from vendors to handle detection and installation over using the apps section in Intune. Is there any downside to handling app installations this way?
I want to throw this at Danny again because I think there's some expertise from your app management days.
All right, so we know who the fall guy is today. I don't really know. I mean, look, when it comes to scripting, there's a lot of ways to get yourself in trouble. I think the proactive remediation thing is interesting. I'm not sure how many apps you already have going through this process today. I don't know, like those are some questions, like if I were talking to you on a call, those are the questions I would ask to help understand what your process is and how far it's scaled out. I'm going to say, look, I just go with EAM and use the evergreen feature, provide whatever feedback. But I think because you're using the remediation scripts, you have a process, and that process could help improve what Nicole's already done with EAM. Maybe not, just depending like what is the process, right? Because you could be giving valuable feedback, or you could be influencing and providing more value to what she's already thinking to innovate it for a next iteration or make it easier, more efficient, simpler. But I probably would take that angle right now. I don't have a lot of context of the ask, but if I have more context, I would ask more questions and then see how I could take that feedback that you provide and either improve or tell you kind of more what we're doing in iterating that space. But yeah, my first reaction is like just that, because you're already using a script to do the evergreen thing, that feels like just overcomplicating it. But I get it, because you didn't have evergreen, so you made a solution, which is great. Do you still need to do that solution? I think is the question I would ask right now. Now I have an evergreen. Do you still need to do your solution? Because the evergreen process, at least it's on Microsoft and Microsoft technology. So hey, let Microsoft do it, and you can save some cycles somewhere else. I'll leave it there. But like, I love for more feedback, because I love to know more about what you're trying to do, and I'm sure Nicole will want to hear what you're doing today and how it could help or provide some insights on what she's already doing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that like maybe it was useful before evergreen auto update existed in EAM. So I'm also curious why, if and why that's still something that you need to do today. I think with all scripting, there's definitely more flexibility with it. So don't quote me on this, but I wouldn't say it's explicitly, what was the question? There's explicit like non-support, or yeah, I think the downside is that you kind of take operational ownership over the script and the process and the customizations that you have there, instead of Microsoft handling it for you.
Yeah. The whole ownership and accountability you're taking is impressive, but like you probably don't need to do that. Assuming again the evergreen piece meets your needs, right? Think about your scripting, like you created a script to do X, but then as you need to evolve it, iterate it, you're gonna have to We talked about failure cases, right? So how do you understand your failure case? It's all logic that has to go into V1 of your script, V2 of your script, V2.5. Like it's a never-ending cycle. So not saying that, you solved the problem with the technology you had, which is great. We have technology now that's built in native to the app model. I would say, does that meet your needs? And then provide the feedback so that Nicole can take that feedback and make what we have better.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the link for feedback is aka.ms/Intune feedback. And for anyone who's posted questions, as we've answered, if we've asked for more context, feel free to reply on the question you posted, and we'll keep monitoring that throughout the day. We have another question from LinkedIn. Does EAM update user-based apps where the user has installed it on their user profile?
So I think I'm understanding this question correctly. Maybe not. Danny, David, please jump in. I think there's a difference between like user context and system context apps. So for user context, those fall within the scope of what we do for auto updates. But if it's an app that a user has installed on their own outside of the management cycle or outside of the managed apps, I think that's a different question that I will let David answer.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is what we call internally kind of an app claiming scenario. So the user's installed it, and now the admin says, "Hey, let's keep that app updated. That's an app that we want to help keep going." And so if it's just cleanly user installed, if EAM, and this is where I'm listening for Nicole's answer, EAM able to access and update user installed apps in the user profile, then I think you're in good shape. Where we do have some trouble right now, and we've got some ideas how we can maybe solve this in the future, is if the app is installed as a optional or available app and installed through company portal. It's a little harder for us to update that and yet keep it as an available user managed app without making it a required app and fully taking over ownership of that app. And so that's something we want to do a little bit better. But otherwise, I think we've got most of the remaining scenarios covered pretty well. Correct me if I got anything wrong, Danny, Nicole.
No, I think we hit the gist of it, Lee. Yeah, I mean, we can elaborate and overthink this, but where we're at, I think we're fine. Like, if that person has more comments, like, please drop them in. We got time, so go for it.
Okay, we have another one from LinkedIn. Do we have the ability to use custom attributes like silent parameters?
I think this is about EAM. But so EAM does some pre-populating of some attributes, like when we get the app metadata, it comes when you select an app. We have already gotten the app metadata and we pre-populate some of the fields for you. So things like install command, uninstall command, detection rules, requirement rules, return codes for like reboot, things like that. But it's still like customizable. All the fields you can still edit on your own. Should cover that.
Okay, we have another question, unless anyone has more comments on that one.
No,
okay.
Pretty good.
Okay, this one's coming from Tech Community. In ConfigMgr, it's easy to establish collections based off installed or uninstalled applications, app versions, and plenty of other queries. Is there any way to dynamically scope deployments of apps and scripts to machines similar to how ConfigMgr could scope collections? Creating dynamic machine groups in Intune appears to be extremely limited. We don't want every single app deployment to be evaluated on every single system unnecessarily if there's a good way to rein in the scope of each deployment.
So this is an interesting one because there's two angles to it, and I'll take the first, and then hopefully maybe I can hand off the second angle. which is the second half of this, which is why do you feel the need to use targeting based off of inventory to deploy apps? And there are some legitimate scenarios for that. And so the short answer on that one is we don't have a great solution for that today. It is a common ask, partly because of ConfigMgr's collections, but also because the scenario does make sense in some cases, especially if you are going to try to put in a claiming scenario that we we're just talking about and just make it as automated as possible. So it's something that is harder than it sounds on the surface. So it is something that we've gotten a lot of feedback about that we'd like to do. But I don't know if we're going to necessarily be able to make that happen. What we have today that you can use, it's not automatic, but it does help bridge the gap a little bit, is with Explorer, you can run the query based off of application inventory. Today, that's driven off of discovered apps. We will be replacing out the new data when we can. But you can use Explorer to query all the devices that have a certain version of an app there, and the capabilities that are going to get better and better over time. And then once you have that list of devices, you're able to add those devices to a static device group. So not exactly what you're looking for. It's a little bit of a clunky interim workaround. That's my words, not official Microsoft words. But we're aware of it, and we'd love to make it better. It's going to take a little bit more work to fully supply that scenario. But I think that it may be overstated how often that scenario is useful, and there may be some other ways just to use targeting and different required and available app stuff to solve that. Is there anything there that is worth diving into a little deeper, Nicole or Danny on apps?
New nickname.
I know, where did that come from?
Don't start that. We're not.
Next time he shows up, I'm going to get smacked.
I don't have any. Well, the only thing that came to mind for me was assignment filters, but I don't think that applies in this scenario. But yeah, I don't have any other better answer.
Okay. We will go to the next question then. This one is also from Tech Community. We want to make an application available both as a standalone and also tied to a dependency. However, we have found that dependent applications in Intune cannot be uninstalled regardless of whether the parent application is installed or not on the device. How should we approach this?
This was interesting.
I know.
Nicole, you and I did a lot of work with dependencies, or I say a lot, but we did a fair amount of work with dependencies a while back. This one's interesting because I don't remember it. Like, I don't know. Like right now, my head's going to the viewer that we built. That you're dependent, the app you're looking at in a level up and down, where it is in the tree. I don't have a solid answer for this one. This was interesting to explore because
I think
now I want to go test it.
Yeah, it might be something that we take back, test, and see how it actually works. But I think maybe rule of thumb is, and please correct me, Danny, is like dependencies are kind of managed separately from the parent app itself. But I don't know if that would actually affect this scenario. So I think we would go back and see how this actually plays out. Yeah,
I'd say, look, without me taking the rest of the 20 minutes to nerd out on this, like just hit me up on Tech Community, because it was actually interesting. Like, I think at least the way I read this, and I may have read it wrong, but if I have an application and it has a dependency, I can't uninstall that application even if the dependency doesn't exist. That seems like a problem. We should. If that's what everybody else understood, I think we need to go look at that one, Nicole, because I don't have a solid answer here.
Yeah,
it's a good question. Like I am very intrigued to look at my computer over here and start testing.
Yep. Okay, next question. This one should be fairly easy. How often are new apps added to the enterprise app catalog? What is the process for adding one?
Yeah, never as easy as it seems.
We want to hear this one, Nicole. Come on.
I know. So Danny, surprisingly, same answer as you've probably given a lot of times before.
No,
but...
you can't do it. You can't do that. You can't use me.
no,
Copyrighted.
The process is something that we're constantly trying to improve. And I think right now we're definitely taking a closer look at that process and how we can like scale the catalog given updates, new apps, things like that. So keep an eye out is my answer. But the best way for app requests to come in is still through feedback portal. And we are constantly trying to make improvements.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah.
Okay, question on tech community. Will EAM app installers that install in the system context automatically remove existing user context installs for the app?
I'm not sure. I will double check on that one too.
I don't think it does, Nicole.
I don't think it does.
Yeah. When we initially built it, if I understand the question correctly, if app A exists on my machine and the user installed it, if I want to install app A from the managed solution, Intune, will it remove the app A that I installed in my user profile? And I'm going to assume probably not. But it also, I hate giving this answer, but it's also kind of depends. I hate using that because I hate it when I wasn't Microsoft and people would tell me it depends, but it really does depend. It depends because it depends on how the app installs. If it installs for the user, then I possibly could overwrite if I installed it as a user on my profile. But if it installs a system, I don't think it will reinstall as user. So that's something, Nicole, we should probably go just double check and test, but I don't think it will. So it would have to do with the detection method. That's kind of what I'm overly bypassing or skirting by. It depends on the detection method. So,
and the behaviors, the ultimate behaviors are also going to depend on the app installer itself and how well it handles those kind of changes. So for EAM to try to solve all of that across every installer is a little bit challenging. So,
it's not a scenario we looked at when we first built it, but it is a good ask. Maybe something we can iterate.
Yeah.
So good feedback for you, Nicole.
Yeah, I don't think it handles that automatically, but I'm curious now what the different scenarios end up, like different conflict scenarios end up resulting in.
Yep. Yeah. So whoever asked that, follow up with us on Tech Community. I know I'm on Tech Community. I don't know about Nicole, but if you find me, I'll pull Nicole in. It's good feedback for us all in the app team.
Okay, question from LinkedIn. With the discussions around app failures and remediation, how can Intune help identify and manage vulnerabilities across endpoints?
Well, let's go back to the vulnerability agent that I described a little bit earlier. That really is a scenario that we built that for. And again, the idea is we're trying to bridge the gap between the security analyst who's using Defender and threat vulnerability management in Defender to identify the top issues and what the list of CVEs are, and make that a little bit more consumable for an Intune app management admin. So we bring in the list of vulnerable apps and the recommendation from Defender. Usually that's going to be update to a version or just simply update it. Which means that there isn't necessarily a specific version that they can target will address all the issues, but keep the devices on the latest version available is still the recommendation. And bring that into the Intune console where you can see the prioritized list based off of the impact score. The impact score from Defender is actually a fairly complicated algorithm that I've looked at, and I didn't understand all the math, but I know that it brings in special systems that you can identify in Defender, the list of CVEs, the scores of the CVEs, the types of the vulnerabilities, and it manages all that together with the list of devices that those vulnerabilities are found on to come up with this impact score for each app. And that's really a great way to help prioritize where you focus first on deploying app updates, or occasionally the recommendation will be the removal. Then the next thing that agent does is that we're actually using AI in order to try to match the name that vulnerability that Defender has for that app. So they have a highly processed and normalized name for apps that doesn't necessarily match directly with the app name that you'll have in your apps list or in the EAM catalog or even in Winget. So we are using LLM and AI to try to do the matching for you and come up with a recommended list of apps. And the best match is the one that we're going to offer for you. But we're giving the ability to look through that and say, actually, this is a better choice to use that, or there is no good choice. I need to go and create it and then come back, rematch, and use that app for the remediation. And then the task is created to go and deploy that to try to help automatically apply the same targeting as an older version of that app is found, to help streamline that app deployment process, but while keeping just the right amount of human in the loop to manage, do I have the right app? Do I have the right targeting? Do I actually want to deploy the update, or maybe we want to go and do something different to remove that app, depending on which app it is. You may have been, if it was one you didn't even know was in your organization, you may choose to remove it, for example. And so that is the tooling that we've been building. It's in public preview. The team is open to an awful lot of feedback on that and continuing to try to make it better, as we really see as vulnerabilities, the pace of vulnerabilities coming in, and third-party app patching becoming more and more important to keep an enterprise secure, that's kind of the streamlined channel that we're building to try to help you achieve those kind of results faster and with more confidence and with the right prioritization in your organization.
Hey, David, I got a question for you. A while back when we were doing the whole inventory thing and the EAM thing, we had the challenge of trying to map app names. So does a vulnerability agent help solve that now? Obviously, I've been disconnected from it for a while, but like, how did it evolve? Like,
so you can imagine we'd love to have a list of the vulnerabilities in Intune for an app that we've inventoried. And so that's something we may be able to do sometime in the future, but we have to solve that matching problem, because as I alluded to earlier, the names that Defender gives us are not equal to the names that we have in app inventory or in your app list, especially because you get to customize the name of the app in the list of apps. So we have to work with that. So the mechanism of using app name matching using LLM that we developed for the vulnerability agent is something that we're hoping we can reuse in scenarios like that when necessary. Whenever we can find a more solid or reliable matching mechanism that's more like a classic join on XE name or something like that, if we can do that, if that's available to us, we'll lean into those methods first. But when we can't, then we will try to use LLM to help provide potentially a list of candidates and a best match. And in those scenarios, we're almost always the current thinking. And as the quality of the models improves, that the thinking may be able to move forward and become more automated. But for now, we think that an admin should take a look at that recommendation and have the opportunity to override and correct it if the choice made is not the best fit, especially when you have multiple versions or examples, or you have 3 different apps, one for like the inner ring, the middle ring, and the outer ring, and the AI picks one of those. You're like, no, actually I want to start with the inner ring, not the final ring version of that app to deploy it. You should have the ability to see that and correct it before it then takes the next steps on your behalf.
So that human in the loop process where you approve, that makes me think about that other tool I showed you where we had to click approve a while back.
Trying to remember which one you're thinking of.
Don't worry about it. Not important.
But,
Anyway,
but it's the same kind of concept. Hey, this is what we've done. Take a look at it, approve it, or edit it before you approve it. And then we'll go and streamline and automate as much as possible. And that's kind of the way we're thinking about trying to enhance Intune.
Got it.
And the experiences throughout the product.
Okay, cool.
Okay, we've got probably the last question we can ask. We'll see if we can fit more than one. When should I use supersedence versus uninstall, install, replacement approaches?
Yeah, I think I'm understanding this question correctly, but supersedence actually does cover the replace scenario, where you can also choose to uninstall the app that you are superseding. I guess the guidance here is to use supersedence when you need that relationship, or like if it's used to update an app, but it actually does cover the replace scenario as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, we can slip one more in. So how do I know which applications are actually being used?
So in endpoint analytics, there is some usage information there per app, and we are showing it at the tenant level. And so you can see which ones have the most minutes or hours of usage across the entire tenant. We've aggregated that data together. And so the next question that most people ask is, well, I need to know which devices are not using that app and which ones are. And it's a good common ask. It is, again, one of the top things that we've been asked for in app inventory. So it's on the radar of things that we'd like to improve, and maybe provide some better insights there. We do need to make sure that we do it in a way so that we are privacy conscious as well. So that we strike the right balance between the information you need, either for license management. I'm assuming like where it's not actually being used is potentially a license management scenario, or maybe it's just a refining of your targeting. So you remove it and clean up devices that aren't using apps that you may have targeted. In any of those scenarios, we can totally see why that information would be very valuable and useful. And we'd love to find a way to bring it to you on a per device basis, and have some ideas. We've got some work to do to make that happen.
Thanks, David. Okay, we're gonna wrap things up with final tips. Mine is just gonna be my shameless plug for community. If you visit aka.ms/join Intune community, that's the best way to stay up to date on engagements like this. New features that have been released. You can also join our private community, which allows you to work with the fine folks on this call directly as we build things. So make sure to join if you're not already a member.